listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me, Cabrini University alum, Cabrini Radio host, Kevin Durso. How are you, buddy?
I'm all right. How are you? I'm glad you got that in there, though. That was fun this week. Actually, I had a really good time doing that. The 2 hour. Well,
yeah. Shout out Cavalier Radio. One last time.
Because I was about to say 2 hours. It turned out to not be. There were some. I didn't start directly on time because it's obviously a student-run station. The student who was in before me was doing a show, had an interview on a show, ran a little long. So I get in there and I kind of was just wondering is there any way I can stretch this a little bit? Because I really wanted to get the full 2 hours in. And basically they and believe me, when you do stuff like this and it's fun like this, because it's full disclosure for people who are thinking it's radio, I'm just doing this on a college radio station. It was a music show.
For those that don't know, real quick, Cabrini University is closing, and as the Cabrini radio program kind of winds down, they have invited some alumni back to host a radio show. Yeah. And Kevin got invited for a spot.
Yeah, well, I mean, it wasn't like they reach out to me. There was a form where you could express interest. Of course, I was interested. I spent 3.5 years doing something like that.
And you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I was kind of giving the disclosure, it wasn't like it was, I just want to be in there and do 2 hours of this and go, either talk to myself about sports or banter with somebody else. No. It was a music show. So that's also why you're trying to maximize the time you have. Sure. So don't tempt me with a good time saying no one's coming in after this. So stay as long as you want.
Oh no. I'm surprised you're not still there.
Well, first of all, okay. I definitely had we're talking for the rest of the night. The next morning, there are shows back on for students, so I can't stay then.
I'm kidding. Yeah.
But I could have just as easily said at that point, fine, I'm going to midnight. Who cares? I could have stretched it for a further hour after that. And I'm listen, it's still a Thursday night. I still have work the next day.
Well, listen,
I got to cut it at 11.
I am glad that you had some amount of fun this week, because I got to tell you, watching these hockey games sure have not been.
Sure.
As we kind of shift over into the hockey conversation here, if you're not following us on social media, hit us up over there. We're at YWT Podcast. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso. And also you can find the show just everywhere you find your podcasts. Download it everywhere. Tell your friends. You know the drill. Okay. Frankly,
I love that you've led in with this, so we could put it off for 2 extra minutes talking about this.
I had to, right? And now we have to take the lid off the garbage can.
Well, and I thought that what I did on Thursday night was the only big finality thing of the week.
Listen.
Then Friday and Saturday happened.
Yeah, let's get right into it. The Flyers have lost 7 games in a row.
Mm-hmm.
Since our last show, we've actually only had 2 games because our last show was a little bit late.
Mm-hmm.
You lose 4-2 in Buffalo. You lose 6-2 in Columbus. Man, I do listen, just to put off the inevitable misery a little bit longer.
Okay.
I do want to mention the 2 goals in the Columbus game, because we did have a couple of NHL firsts.
Sure.
Ola Lexel got his first NHL goal, and Adam Jennings got his first NHL goal. I believe it was also Adam Jennings' first point.
Right,
yes,
right. And good for them for that happening. And it's a moment they will never forget. And they played a good number of games.
Well, and as we dive into it, we do also have to remember that, yes, expectations were high coming into this season. Yes, we all want this, expectations were not high coming into this season.
Right.
And yes, at this point in time, we all want this team to make the playoffs because of the first, 60 games of the season. Maybe the first 50 games of the season, where they were, really a decent team and put themselves in that good playoff positioning.
Mm-hmm.
So, but like I said, at the beginning of the season, this was a rebuilding team. We were in the, we were having the Macklin Celebrini conversation. I was looking up Matvei Michkov's stats every week, stuff like that. And we do have to remember that when teams are bad like that, guys getting their first points, that does have some meaning.
Yeah, it's hard to put it into words like that right now. In terms of for those 2 specifically, you're right about everything else leading up to, and
sure.
Well, and that look,
but it's pretty tough when you're the only 2 goals in a 6-2 loss at the end of a 7-game losing streak.
As I feel as you would expect for anything like this, I got a whole bunch of stuff in front of me ready to go.
Okay.
I kind of am deviating from that for a second because I don't, the stuff I have in front of me that I started to prep after last night has way more to do with trying to put all of this together, like kind of the how we got here, more than I guess the overall feeling.
Okay.
We can just come right out and like I don't have this written down. We can just come right out and say it because I think I said it a couple times through the course of the week. I did a couple of spots on 97.3 during the course of the week, things like that. And we can just come right out and say it. It's disappointing to come this far and feel like this is where it ends. And full disclosure, just because like there's 4 games left in the season, they are not mathematically eliminated, but there was an element to watching Saturday that was this is game 7 and you didn't have it that night. And
it certainly feels like it. And as we sit here, current standings Sunday morning, as we sit here recording in our normal time slot. By the way, we'll be back next Sunday. Don't worry. As we sit here right now, the Flyers are technically sitting out of the playoffs. They have the same number of points as the Pittsburgh Penguins, basically the exact same record with 1 extra loss.
Here's the best way.
In wins losses time.
No. Here's the best way to put it. Before the Flyers played on Saturday night, so Pittsburgh had won, the Flyers were waiting to play.
They had the exact same record.
Not even that. It was at that given moment. I think it was Pittsburgh, the Flyers, Washington, and Detroit all had the same points percentage at that given moment. 4 teams looking at 1 playoff spot tied in points percentage.
Insanity.
Right. That already tells you where the playoff picture is. And then, and listen, forget the Pittsburgh game. The Pittsburgh result, one way or the other, didn't change what was on the table for the Flyers going into Saturday night. You needed to win the game. You needed points.
You need more goals than the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Right.
That's it.
Well, and that's the other hard part of it, right? Like, it's not just disappointing that you've come 75 games or whatever, and then game 76, 77, 78, it's like, oh, this is going this way. It's who you're playing. They got to a certain point, and when they were through with the Rangers, and I said 10 points in 10 games over that 10-game stretch, and they got it. And it's not going to be the prettiest looking thing, but they got through that part. So you would assume that, hey, once they made it through this part,
the schedule softens up a little bit.
Chicago, a critical head-to-head against the Islanders that if you can't get up for it, good luck. And then following it up with Buffalo and Columbus. Even if you didn't win the Islander game and lose it in regulation, lose it in overtime, who cares? Get points in all the others, you're going to still be there. That was pretty simple. I mean, no way around it. And they're like, it's not even that they're fading. It's not that they're falling out of this. It's how it's happening and who it's happening against. Because for the whole season, all we talked about was look at all of the teams in the top 10 that they've been able to beat and compete with and all that stuff
and
like
hang
that.
with on a given night.
Right. And now it's all of a sudden like it's regressed to the norm that we expected at the start of the year, where it's like, oh yeah, they're going to be on Chicago's level or Buffalo's level. Well, even Buffalo, we have Buffalo better than them.
Right.
Like, actually, we expected this kind of stuff, but you don't expect it 77 games in where it's and I don't
built what they've built.
Well, and I don't want to put down the Buffalo game because the Buffalo game was pretty clearly a situation of they've had multiple games like this where they give up 20 shots in a game, take 35, don't score more than 1 or 2 goals, and give up 4 or 5. And it's like, well, what is there to say? You can't finish on your chances. The other goalie plays better. What more is there to say?
Well, and Fedotov looked pretty soft in that game against Buffalo.
I don't even call it soft. It was exactly what the warning label was. He wasn't going to come in and necessarily be a miracle worker, and that's what everybody was hoping for with fresh blood. It comes down to, you can we talked about this last week. Take your pick: Fedotov, Sandstrom, Peterson. Once the goaltending situation went to where it did, nobody could fill the void as the backup. So so what do? You have no choice but to throw Ersson out there because Ersson was giving you a fighting chance to win in January and February.
He was your best goalie.
He was your best goalie. Like, that's the hardest part. The biggest thing that we're going to be doing for this week, probably next week, like unless something drastically changes over the course of the next 6 days, next week we'll be doing this. And certainly the show after when it's officially over, if that's where it goes. And then beyond, honestly, like we'll go every other week and we listen, we'll do what we usually do. If they don't make the playoffs at this point, which is what it looks like, then we'll do what we usually do over the playoffs, which is we will keep an eye on who's in and follow the playoffs and talk about that because we do.
Yeah, of course. We both love hockey. We will absolutely talk about.
I wasn't taking away from that at all.
Absolutely.
But if we ever get into anything with the Flyers, we are going to get into questions that are going to linger as a result of this that in some cases may not be fair. I don't think it's fair to just to put a label on Sam Ersson based off of this season because it's such extenuating circumstances. Yep. Because, and I wrote it at one point in time, I wrote it down because I started to look at everything and I went, I've got to know what, or not got to know, but it was like, what's the record that they had again, I'm not trying to make this the only reason that things happen, but what was their record the day before Carter Hart took leave and what happened afterwards? And their record the day that he took leave, despite losing a couple of games before it, like he had lost against Colorado. Yeah. They played Ottawa and they lost.
Was coming.
They were 25-18-6 in 49 games and had 56 points. They've played 29 games since then and are 11-13-5. And obviously post-trade deadline, it's even worse.
Yeah.
And I didn't write that one down specifically because do we really even need to? I mean, like, nope. You know what you're looking at. They've lost 7 in a row. They're 0-5-2 during those 7 alone. So you can even take just the 7 games out of it, get through the gauntlet that we talked about. And when you got through the gauntlet, they were 11-8-3, which actually, hey, 500. That was keeping you in the playoffs. They were 11-8-3. That's what the record is. Through up to the point where the losing streak started after they beat Boston. Yeah. So that was why beating Boston was such a big deal, is because before that you were 10-8-3 in terms of record, and getting to that 11th win and gaining 2 more points, which got you to 25 points over the course of what would that be? 22 games. Okay, you're still kind of on that exact pace that you were before. 56-49. Now it's 25-22. The schedule's going to lighten up in a couple more games. Maintain the pace. You probably make the playoffs.
Probably.
I mean, to get to just to get to 90 points too, you were looking at getting 34. You needed 9 more points.
Yeah, no,
from that date to get to 90.
It can't be understated how hard this team has sputtered, and just looking around the league and watching the rest of this race also not really care. That just makes it not really care. You know what I mean? But makes it even more frustrating, right?
Because this was what I brought up
losing everything,
right? But this was what I brought up a little bit. I think I brought up earlier. Like it's weird because I want to say last week because we It honestly, there's a way watching those 2 games where it feels like a week. So I brought
like a week each.
So I brought this up on Tuesday after the Islander game. I believe anyway.
Yeah.
It's one thing to be where they were at 83 points or 82 points. Look in front of you and say, I don't know, and I just picked a team last week and threw a random team in there. The Capitals are at 87. So you go in, you're at 82, they're at 87. You need a win to keep the playoff hopes alive then. And it's clear you're not there. You need a lot more to go right than just winning your games to still make it. And if you lose in overtime, that's crushing to the hopes, and you don't really build it up as much, but you're still in a tie. And that 1 point could help you make the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely.
When they tie the game like that, it wasn't just they tied the game and then they blew it in overtime and it doesn't make a difference. You still looked at it they got a point, and depending on how the next 3 days go, you still play Friday, Saturday, and maybe have a chance to open it up again, because same thing, everybody's tied. And guess what? You still held the spot going to Friday.
Yep. Well, and that's right. And that's the disappointing part is, right? We've talked about it on this show a bunch, is that you had this lead, you built it up over that first 40, 50, 60 games, and just watching them throw it away, just watching them absolutely refuse to win a single hockey game for what feels like a month and a half.
See, and I'm not saying that you're necessarily wrong, but I hate the wording of that. That they're throwing it away. What you don't like is that I'm not making an excuse for it, because this is one of the conversations we're going to have. And I kind of talked about it a little bit last week, because I brought up the idea that you can come up with the difference between making an excuse and it being a reason, because it happens that way. If you're reasoning this is why something happens, then that's why something happens.
Right.
You don't want to be sitting here making excuses for things down the stretch, because there is no excuses to be made. You were in the spot, you played like this for 70 games, and now it's fallen apart.
Okay.
So I don't like that, but you can see how gassed they are in certain situations.
Can we didn't have a starting goaltender for the back half of the year be a
Well,
reason?
then I think I need to get into all the stuff I wrote down then.
Okay.
Because if this is where you want to go right now,
like, well, if you're talking about reasons versus excuses, I'm just wondering, like,
well,
is
no,
that
so
is
no,
that
no,
a
no.
reason?
Well, just okay. So then just hear me out, because then we need to get into this part, because I've been thinking a lot since the game ended last night, because it felt like the end. Like, you're watching the way that this thing is going, and as it progressively got worse to, from, hey, 3-1 maybe to 4-1 very quickly, 5-1, 6-1. To be honest with you, I was out during the Columbus game. I watched the game at a friend's place. I'm trying to do my stuff on the side. And Saturday was, to just pull back the curtain, I guess, or whatever. It was a very busy sports schedule kind of day.
Yes.
Lots of stuff going on. So the idea of like this watching with, like, when I was over at a friend's place and watching and all stuff like that, it was
included but not limited to WrestleMania 40 in Philadelphia.
No, that wasn't it at all.
Okay.
Because so here's actually the way it really was. Is so the day started with the other games. We watched the tail end of the Pittsburgh game. This is my friend who's a Boston fan, so Bruins were playing the Panthers later in the afternoon. We kind of kept the Phillies on a side screen to keep an eye on that. And the real main point of what we were hanging out for was the Final Four was on.
Right.
So interestingly enough, we had two friends over who went to NC State, were fans. So it's like, oh, this is a big deal to them, obviously. So that got the TV. And I kind of, literally the Flyers were starting as the second half of that game was going on. So it was kind of like, while that was fading, it was keep an eye on that. And we did eventually move the Flyers to the TV for a little while. And then as that unraveled, it was want to go back to the other game. And I just kind of kept it on a side screen again and was trying to write. Because at that point, the story's writing itself, right? Like the game story is, the game's over. So you can just kind of piece together what happened, whatever. So I'm going back and forth between, like, the stream is still on, but I'm not like paying close attention with like 6 minutes left. Like once they made it 6-1, am I really paying close attention? Just get it over with so I can hit publish. It's ready. And I didn't even see the Gin goal. Didn't even see it. Like, went back, thought it was 6-2. I'm like, oh, okay, somebody scored. Who did? And then happened to see it was another first. And it's like, okay, that's great. So my point, though, is that as this unraveled to 4-1, 5-1, 6-1, it felt like the end. It's like watching them lose a winner-take-all game that ends the season. So
felt like watching Kevin Hayes play for this team last year.
I know, but like I'm saying, like what I'm comparing it to is like when you go through a playoff series and for 6 games, like a little, like, the exact comparison I'll make to it then more than anything. Like I put down, like I wrote down today, winner take all game that ends your season.
Yep.
What it felt like is the way that it was watching the Flyers play the Islanders in the bubble, where it looks like it's over at 3. They're down 3-1 in the series. They win game 5 in overtime. All right, still some life. They find a way to win game 6 too. So now you're sitting in a spot where it's like, hey, it's one game for all the marbles here to go to the next round. Anything can happen in a game 7, and it turns out to be a 4-0 loss. And you can tell pretty early that it's like, oh, this is just the tank's empty.
2 or 3-0 by the end of the first period, wasn't it?
It was 2-0, I think, and then it slowly deteriorated from there. And it's like,
and you weren't beating that Islanders team with a 2-0 lead. Nope.
And there was an element where, for the same thing, for the lack of playoff experience and the lack of amount of time in the playoffs that they had, and the way that they were getting played, you kind of understood it. You're like, just seems like the tank's empty. They played overtime games to win all 3. The last 2 went a little deeper than normal. The one was double overtime. You had to put a lot of energy out there to get to this point. So as great as it would have been, it didn't happen. And you weren't, and like in that case, because it was the second round of the playoffs, and that was hardly the expectation for that year coming in either. It was, well, that was cool though. They won a playoff round. They got to game 7 of round 2. Let's see what happens next year, kind of thing, right?
Right.
But when it's over, kind of. So, and believe me, during the game, after the game, collectively, I've watched people who are trying to cope with the feeling for the whole thing. And everyone is doing what is natural at this point. And the morning after that we're recording this falls right in line with this as well.
Yep.
They're doing the natural thing we've seen year after year after year, which is look for something to blame. And that's why I'm coming into the reasoning part of it. You're definitely not like blaming, hey, they played over their, like there's, and I said as much, even I put it out there, like, hey, listen, or that, because right away, like one of the comments I saw, and I'm going to like, I have this written down later as part of this, is I see right away, they quit. Or they, and I go, or they played over their heads for 70 games.
Right.
And they just don't have anything left. And I get that that's not good enough to an extent. Like, that's not good enough of an explanation. So you want reasons why this is happening? I'll give you reasons. I was sitting here thinking about this stuff for a while. Let's start with this one. Look at the save percentage in particular, since they lost the luxury of having the rookie goalie be the backup that gets involved in the regular rotation and then a legitimate starter after the fact.
It has been bad.
Once Carter Hart took his leave of absence, it became Sam Erson's net, and nobody else could provide what was needed to have confidence in a backup.
Nope.
So the save percentage went into the ground. You played a lot, and sometimes it wasn't necessarily, the save percentage went into the ground and you're constantly losing 6-2 or 7-0 like they did a couple times, and giving up 40 shots, and that's how the save percentage tanks. They're losing games 4-1 or 5-2 or whatever it is, giving up 20 shots.
Yep. Yeah, it got so bad that Danny Briere had to go dig a couple guys out of Russia. Like, come on, man. I'm sure. And I'm sure that they were. I don't say that. They were probably working on that, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I don't say that about Kolosov and I don't say that about Kolosov because I get trying to do that. Well, no, and I get trying to do that at his age because the idea is, to be honest, I look at Kolosov and I'm not saying this is who he's going to be or what they think he's going to be, but for him,
you know what I mean. Like they were trying to get Fedotov out of Russia.
Well, yes, I know that.
Sure, but
I know
that got accelerated a little bit.
But what I'm saying is that there's a difference between bringing over a guy who's 27 and didn't play literally for a whole season 2 years ago versus the guy who just turned 22, who you're sitting there and like in your head going, in 3 years time at 25 with maybe imagine if starting at 22, he plays in the minors. Gets 1 full year, 2 full years under his belt potentially, and then starts to play at the NHL level, isn't great, and then a year later figures it out, and it's like this is their version of
an actual development path.
Well, this is their version of Sorokin. This is their version of Shesterkin, who you got to give it a little time, but he could be on that level if you follow this path where it's like, well, he's been here for long enough to adjust.
Right.
That when he does play in the NHL, you're not going to have questions about whether or not he's capable, or whether or not, not even capable is even the right word. You know what it is? You're not going to have questions about whether or not he's had time to freaking break in his equipment because it's not the same as in the KHL or, to jump right into an NHL game.
Sure. And you do expect, and at that point, you'd just be getting a little bit more of a traditional development path, right? Because that's how a lot of prospects go. You come in, it takes you a couple years. A lot of goalies don't hit the NHL until they're mid to late 20s.
Right.
At least that's kind of the traditional mindset.
Right.
We've been a little bit spoiled because Carter Hart jumped in right away as a young kid, and Sam Ersson was forced onto the NHL roster at a young age, essentially.
But even then, and I hear what you're saying, and I hear where you're kind of going with that. But even then, there were people who, even right up until the day before he was on leave, didn't trust in him as a starter either. Like that had questions like this too.
I don't know how.
What are you wondering if they had an ulterior?
To be honest,
no. Are you wondering if they had an ulterior where it's like his name was floated in this? So
not really.
Okay.
I just think like if you're evaluating him as a hockey player, I don't understand how you wouldn't have confidence in him as a goaltender. But regardless, it doesn't really matter because hopefully his career is over. So
and beside the point, like with it, I think that might have changed a little bit too once he wasn't here, and then you watch Cal Peterson or Felix Sandstrom.
You snap back to reality.
Listen, jury's gonna still be out on Fedotov because it's like, listen, the guy got 1 relief appearance and 1 start, and I'm not gonna judge him off of those 2 games and say, well, he's a bust.
Well,
you don't know
because he looked really good on Monday against the Islanders, and then he looked equally as poor on Friday in Buffalo. So if you're judging him on one, you have to judge him on both.
Sure. And And again, the other part of it is that to throw him into the playoff conditions that he was going to go into after all, like, he hasn't played in North America ever. And I don't care if there's there's some adjustment because there's some KHL rinks that are that regulation size and some that are not. So it's not like he's never played on a rink that size or never played by some rules that apply to the NHL. No, there's still stuff that's similar, but it doesn't matter. You're being put in a spot where it's a perfect spot to throw him in. Like if you said he was making his first start with 6 games left in the season, and it's because there's nothing to play for, so you just want to see him,
20 points
then nobody cares because it's exactly when you should be playing him. But you literally put him in with the intention of, well, and in fairness, he's playing because you don't have anybody else there to back up.
Correct.
Like at that point, he's got to be on the NHL roster, and I get that. But you're putting him in that situation with the expectation that maybe he can win.
Sure.
Not, hey, he's getting a feeling out process. Maybe he can win.
Well, and if you were
playoff push going.
And if you were bad and if you were 15, 20 points out of a playoff spot, there wouldn't have been as much of a rush to get him here in the first place because you'd be taking a little bit more of a look at Felix Sandstrom.
Well,
you'd be taking a little bit more of a look at, some of
I don't know about that because I think that as it faded, like to be honest, I think even before they gave Sandstrom a shot, they didn't feel like they needed to see anything more. They were just trying to see if maybe something had changed.
Right. No, I get that. That's fair.
And as soon as you have games like he did against well, certainly the Florida game, but I'm trying to think of the other one before the Boston game, where again it came down to it was the same story. John Tortorella told you for a year that one more save, needs one more save, constantly needs one more save. And in Boston, he needed one more save, and against Florida, he needed 2.
Yep.
And at that point in time, you knew that wasn't the answer either. There's no way to, that. Right. It's one of the big, I hate that it's going to be because it certainly for a little while didn't feel like it was one of their biggest strengths in the first 40, 50 games of the season. And now it's going to be one of their biggest questions because now you're trying to figure out, does Ersson have the makings of a starter? It's hard to judge him as a starter because he started, let's be real. He started in the second half the way Martin Brodeur started games. You just kept throwing him out there like it's him or nothing. Isn't that one of the most irrelevant? Wouldn't that have been one of the most irrelevant positions in the game if you were the backup goalie in the 90s to Dominik Hasek or Patrick Roy or Martin Brodeur, where it's like
Mike Richter?
People actually ask that question. They go back and go, who was the backup goalie on the 96 Stanley Cup champion Colorado Avalanche? Or who was the backup for the 2000 New Jersey Devils? Because you never saw him.
Wasn't it just Jocelyn Thibault in Colorado?
In Colorado, one year it was Dave Abisher.
It was Dave Abisher, right?
I don't think that was 90. I don't think that was 96, by the way. I think that was 01. But the one year it was Dave Abisher. Actually, I know that the other one, it's not Thibault.
Okay.
But I do know. Yes, did he play for that franchise? Yes, I know.
So I ask you again.
Yeah.
As we evaluate this season, and obviously it's not over yet, and we will do a bit more of a formal funeral for this season after it's over. But
and I'm just getting started today. So.
Sure. Is the fact that you lost your starting goaltender halfway through the season through nobody in that room's fault, right? That's not anybody in that room's fault. Like maybe people in the organization knew whoever, but nobody in that locker room
did anything to lead to it.
Well,
yeah,
exactly. Right. That's what I'm saying. Like nobody,
it's Carter Hart and Carter Hart himself.
A person in that locker room made a decision that caused him to be removed from the team. And like I said, hopefully from the league for good. But as we sit here today,
right. And we don't need to harp on that part like crazy.
Of course. But is that a valid reason for why the team has fallen apart down the stretch? Or is that an excuse in your mind?
It's kind of both because here, all right, you know what I'm going to sit there and tell you then? Here's to me what the right answer is. That's probably the point. That's a turning point in the season and just hold on.
Yeah.
Because up until that, or close to up until that, they had played nearly half of the schedule with virtually no drama or close to no drama. I mean, the worst thing that we were talking about was Morgan Frost isn't playing a lot, and it seems like there's some beef going on with the coach. And then there was a point where somewhere in that range of time, it seemed like some of that started to get put to rest a little bit.
Yeah.
The only thing I've got other than Carter Hart at the end of January taking leave is that was in that same month. That was when the Cutter Gauthier trade happened.
Early January.
That was the first piece of off-ice news that started to kind of come in. And
That's
then
when the turbulence started.
But you had that, like, here's my point though. If you would tell people, like, I thought about this the other day too. If you went through the whole portion of this and said, here's some of the things that are going to happen to your team throughout the course of everything. You're going to trade a top prospect because he doesn't want to play here and go and have everybody in the organization top to bottom, close to top to bottom, be a sounding board for, you don't want to be here, we don't want you.
Yep.
And turn it into more of a public story because now there's quotes behind it. It wasn't just the trade happened. It was the way that they announced the trade.
Held up.
Well, but it was the way that it also went down, like in announcing it. They kept it under wraps to make a deal. In turn, bringing in a player like Jamie Drysdale, because which as much as there's a development process still involved with him, I'm not trying to make it seem like he's like the greatest thing or whatever yet.
Finished product, right?
But like, here's what I mean. That changes the course of your active roster. It wasn't like this was a prospect for prospect swap where we go, okay, you forget about it for a year.
You dropped theoretically a top 4 defenseman onto your roster.
Right. It directly influenced what your team was going to look like in the moment.
Now.
So that changed. So you have that. So your top prospect, one of your top prospects gets traded because he doesn't want to play here. Your starting goaltender, you find out, is part of a major case that involves sexual assault charges. He's on leave. He's gone out of the picture. During that time, you're in the middle of a 5-game losing streak where you desperately need the All-Star break. You come back from the All-Star break and win 4 in a row as if like that never happened.
Okay, we're back. Right.
As if we're back. Okay. You continue to go through February, and in the midst of the 4-game winning streak, you go against what you said all year and all of last year and name a captain. Over the course of the next month, you proceed to at some point in time decide to bench said captain. The trade deadline happens. You traded away your most consistent defenseman. You lost 3 more due to injury, and you still beat a team like the Florida Panthers to kickstart a gauntlet, make it through the gauntlet, and in the midst of the gauntlet, bring over a goaltender that was also out of sight, out of mind. You know, nobody thought that was going to happen. Oh, we kept that secret too. Never, don't worry. We kept that secret too. He's here. Okay. That's an awful lot. Hold on. I forgot another one in the middle of that. The second game of the gauntlet, after you beat Florida to start this thing off, playoff style win, you lose horribly, 7-0. But that's not the story. In the middle of it, it's your coach gets ejected and then gets suspended for 2 games. So as things like that happen and they pile up, you went from 40 some odd games of nothing to from games 50 to 78, a ton.
And by the way, since he's been suspended, John Tortorella has been just on an absolute media tour. Every other press conference, he's either smacking the podium and walking away, or apologizing for smacking the podium and walking away, or
we're going to get to him too.
Every night there's something to talk about with John Tortorella. And maybe, and I think a little bit, is that he is trying to distract from how poorly the team is playing. I think a little bit of this is John being out front as a shield for this team.
Even if it is, there's actually something alarming about that part too.
I mean, that's fair, and we can get into that.
If that's what your theory is, then there's something alarming about that part too. So I'll get to that part. So,
okay.
All right, we talked about save percentage. The starts that Sean Couturier and Cam Atkinson had faded. Joel Farabee faded. And there are plenty of other guys who, like you have to factor all I'm bringing all 3 of those in to an extent.
Right.
Couturier faded, Atkinson faded, Farabee faded. Here's something that I had a thought of during Friday's game in particular.
Okay.
There was a shift where Farabee was on the ice, so was Bobby Brink, so was Jamie Drysdale, and on the same shift, I felt the same thing for all 3 of them in terms of that I'm watching and I'm going, because already you're seeing it fade, right? You're seeing the things fade. They're losing the Buffalo too. And I'm watching that and I'm going, I got one message for all 3 of them in the offseason because they're all probably going to you didn't trade for Drysdale to have him walk after.
Yeah, right. They're all coming back.
Brink is still young and Farabee's under contract for a few more years, so I assume all 3 are back. Maybe maybe Farabee gets floated late, like Stranger Things. I do have I'll get to that part later too with the offseason too because I do have some thoughts on that already, but. My first thought with all 3 of them is that if I don't care who it is who sits down, because Tortorella said he doesn't really do exit interviews, so maybe it's Danny. Okay, fine. If it's Danny, whatever. I got one message for all 3 of them: hit the gym. Serious, they're getting pushed around a lot, and all I can think about watching those guys is the difference between Tyson Forster and those three is Tyson Forster came in, looked physically stronger, and then you watch him in a puck battle and watch how hard it is to get him off the puck and go, if you had four more guys like that, you'd be in a lot better shape.
You said you're talking about Atkinson, Farabee, and
Drysdale. No. Farabee, Brink, and Drysdale.
Farabee, Brink, and Drysdale. Okay.
No, Atkinson at this point. Atkinson at this point, I don't know how.
The gym at this point.
No, Atkinson at this point, I don't even know how he has a future.
There is really if Cam Atkinson considered retirement.
He probably won't though, because why? Why would you do all of that and come back for 1 year for it?
Maybe get an injury and not play next year, Cam.
Come on. But just hold on. The Flyers need to make the right decision here for if you want to keep talking about putting the best roster out to win games and things like that, you need to look at that legitimately and understand how poorly he's played in the second half to the point where it's just bad. It's just not there anymore. And you'd have to buy out the contract.
He cannot keep up.
And I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you right now, this is one of the things, and this is one of the things that should worry people, depending on how everything shakes out. If he's on this roster next year and they don't decide to buy him out, you know exactly what the reason is. And I don't even I'm not even going to say it because I shouldn't have to. You know whose reason it is to keep him. Yep. And it's not going to be the right decision. And it's going to be a step in the wrong direction. I mean, listen, mate, look, maybe it depends on what your theory is, to be honest. It might in terms of it might be the right decision if you're on the tanking side of things. Right. If you think the idea is put out guys who help you lose a few games, then sure, it's the right decision. But it's not the right decision if you're trying to progress from what Right. I think if your answer is that this year was, hey, this was unexpected, they got close, they don't make it, and you want to take another step next year, then he can't be on the roster.
I think it's hard to look at what this roster did this year and decide that the next best step is to actively try to go backwards.
Right.
I think there is still some trimming to be done, the Cam Atkinsons and such, but I think this roster has a good foundation. I think you're heading in the right direction. I think I don't know if it's going to be a rebuild as much as it's going to end up kind of being a retool, because that's what it's been, right? You haven't really rebuilt.
Well, we'll see. I mean, there's a lot still. I know. So let's keep going down the list of reasons. Okay, so I brought up, so far we've done the goaltending save percentage because let's put it this way. It's less about goaltending per se. We've seen games where these guys look like Ersson's played plenty of games where he looks great. He's played plenty of games where he looks terrible. He's played too many games in general. So, and it was, as soon as it wasn't a solidified, you have two guys. That's what you're searching for from here on out. You're searching for two guys who can play and that can keep your save percentage even at level. If we're talking about save percentages, .895. It's below league average, but it's not horrifically below league average. That if you look and say, oh, they're giving up a lot of high danger chances though in that time, right, which they still are, don't get me wrong, but then at least you're sitting there going, that's the reason it's below league average and not by much, is there are too many high danger chances. How do you expect the goalie to stop all of them? I forget what exactly the number is of games or whatever, but the save percentage lately is something like 80. It's 81 or lower.
It's awful.
It's abysmal. It's not even ACHL quality.
Yeah, no, we're talking, it's bad.
Right. So that's one key reason. And then I bring in the starts. Some of the starts faded, and you're watching as other guys are like that. To me is what Tortorella means when he says guys aren't cut out for it. I don't think it's will. I don't think it's effort. It's you got guys who physically got to a certain point in the season and do not have the strength in them. And in some cases, it's like you can sit there and go, Jamie Drysdale, you showed up in January. You didn't train for this season the way that John Tortorella typically would have trained you.
All right.
So you're trying to learn on the fly.
Maybe with some compromised shoulder stuff.
So you're trying to learn on the fly, bulk up and come ready to go for camp. You could be a key part of this thing. As for the other two who did have a training camp, Joel Farabee, it is what it is. There's part of it that you go, is that what he is?
Right.
But on the other hand, where did any of the offense go? You know what I mean? Like he had good offensive numbers for a chunk of it, and then seemingly lost all ability to put up a point.
And I think we're heading into the first real offseason in a couple of years where Joel Farabee doesn't have an excuse, right? He's had some injuries,
Right.
he's had some lingering this, that, the other, and I'm sure he's got some lingering stuff. They're all playing hurt right now. But if he comes out of this season and doesn't have a major surgery, then he's got an off season where he doesn't really have an excuse, right? And you need to go out there and take your break. You deserve a break, but then you get in the gym and you get on the ice and you be a professional athlete.
Well, and Bobby Brink, who I brought up in this too, Bobby Brink's had an easy one as well because you're a rookie. It's your first real full NHL season. You didn't play the whole season. You were up and down a little bit, but when you play at the NHL level and it's another level, you're seeing it. Okay, that's a learning experience for a guy who's his age. We can't be talking about the other guys. We can't be talking about, well, Sean Couturier faded and Cam Atkinson faded and go, what's going to change about that?
Right.
You can change, a guy who's 23 years old, like Brink is, or something in that range.
Well, and you have to figure out that if it's not going to change, then he shouldn't be on your roster. Like and I'm not saying that should be the case, but you need to figure out if that's going to be the case.
We'll get to that kind of reasoning as well.
Okay.
So here, I'm going to bring this up. And here's the thing. I've seen some things where it's like, this can be a reason, and it's also not, because it doesn't contribute to, this doesn't have any recency to it. But it's something that at this point in time, it's impossible to ignore because it's happened regularly. If just watching the Columbus game, when did the game turn? There's an easy answer.
Okay.
Because the game never got a chance to really turn. Like sometimes the game turns and you're for example, the Flyers tied the game in Buffalo. They're pushing, they're out shooting Buffalo by a ton. They're getting goalied in that game. Yep. They finally scored to tie the game. And you can look at the point that the game turned as two things. There was a 4-on-4 situation that opened up the ice and allowed Buffalo to get space to let someone score. And then with seconds remaining in a period, you gave up a backbreaker. That's where the game turns. It's later in the second period. For the first half of that game, you're playing better.
Yeah.
You're in a position where you're playing exactly how you should. I have no questions about effort, no questions about even the ability to outplay a team in that spot. It's not like they were getting beat. They just, you know what I mean? Like,
and some of even that Rasmus Dahlin goal was just kind of a skilled player making a skilled play
but with more ice. And they've had horrible results when the ice opens up like that. 4-on-4, 3-on-3, 5-on-4, even 4-on-5 lately. It doesn't matter. Any situation, they're having horrible results. Saturday, there wasn't a chance for the game to turn.
Right. They just the game turned when the bus turned off.
No, here's what I mean. The puck dropped. They played 2 minutes and got a 4-minute power play. And the power play is so bad that there wasn't even. You almost can't even sit there and say there was 2 minutes to build momentum first before a power play killed the momentum, because it just started the game that way.
Yep.
The power play that has been dreadful all season long has caught up to you in the sense where we're not even having this conversation this morning if this team has 5 to 10 more power play goals in it over the course of the entire season.
Well, no, because they're probably comfortably in a playoff spot.
Right. Because that amount of goals could probably have changed the course of 4 to 5 games. Does that win you, does that win you a game that went to overtime that hey, we didn't get an extra point out of that game in overtime?
Does it get a game to overtime that wouldn't have gone to overtime?
Bingo.
Right. There's so many points left on the table, and when you're just your power play is that bad. And for a while, you were making it up with your penalty kill, which isn't what you should be doing. But you were making it up.
That's not sustainable either.
Well, of course, no. But you were making it up with your penalty kill, and then that's kind of fallen off too. So now you're not threatening 4-on-5. You're not threatening 5-on-4. You're not really threatening 5-on-5 when he's scoring goals.
There's an element of that also, though, that goes back to the save percentage too. When you're killing a penalty and you know that you're a man down situation, and the goalies aren't stopping at are allowing goals on roughly 15 to 20% of the shots that get taken.
God, it's so depressing when you say that.
Then you're sitting there, but you're sitting there worried about it. So you don't play aggressive because you know that you're not getting a save.
Anybody who gets behind you is getting an easy shorthanded goal. Yeah. Of course.
No, I'm not talking about from the power play standpoint. I'm talking about on the penalty kill. You're worried about, if you're worried about giving up a goal, you're not going to take that chance that gave you the odd man rush while you were shorthanded before, because you're sitting there going, the goalie's making 80 to 85% of the saves in a game.
because if it comes back 3-on-2 the other way, they're scoring. Yep.
Or if you don't even get out of the zone trying to do it, is the point.
That's
right. So, all right, let's put that one past us for a second.
Yeah.
Because what I've seen, what I've seen a lot of is they quit. I've seen a lot of John Tortorella lost the room or his message is wearing thin and things like that. I don't think they quit, because if they would have quit, then I don't see how you can go over the course of this 7-game losing streak. They scored a goal to tie a game with under 10 seconds left to get a point and reacted as if it mattered more. Reacted like they just won Game 7 of the Stanley Cup at that spot. Yep. So I don't think they quit there. And I don't think even losing in regulation to Buffalo, you played better than Buffalo and just didn't quite execute enough from all angles. Goaltending wasn't quite good enough. You gave up a 4-on-4 goal, gave up a backbreaker at the end. I talked about last show. I talked about how in the Islander game, every goal that the Islanders scored was off of a turnover. So it's just execution. It's just not quite there. I don't think your intentions are bad. I don't think it's that they're sagging and going, well, we just can't win, so we're quitting on this thing. Right. I don't think it's that. With Tortorella, you can look at some of the things he's done and wonder if it's the most advisable decision to make. I talked about Couturier and Atkinson fading, and you could easily just go back to the beginning of the year and say, well, gee, playing big minutes from the jump after missing an entire season.
And in Couturier's case, almost 2.
Right. That's probably not the most advisable thing. You've run, you're running the pairing of Travis Sanheim and Cam York out there for 25 to 30 a night and straight into the ground. Nope, that's probably not advisable.
There's a lot. Sam Emerson every single night.
You're feeling forced to play Sam Emerson every night because your backup situation is terrible. There were all of the nights. Remember how a couple months ago, it hasn't happened for a little while consistently, but all the months that we talked about them playing 11-7, you're overworking forwards with no balance to the lines.
Yep.
And you're insisting upon got to play 7, got to have Mark Stahl in the lineup, or got to have this or whatever. And I'm going to pull Bobby Brink or Ola Lixel or somebody like that.
Guys who can take some minutes off of the Couturiers and
okay. So you can look at those decisions and factor it in. And I know people are going to bring up that he lost the room and the lost the room thing and center it around both the naming of Sean Couturier as captain and the subsequent benching. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let his words do the talking. He said it himself earlier this week, literally the day after our last show was posted. If a player quits on me or players quit on me, you've got the wrong damn coach here and you've got the wrong damn people here.
Yep.
So do they? Is this the wrong coach? And I know, hold on. And I know there's plenty of people who believe that and solely believe that because John Tortorella is mean and nasty and he doesn't have 1 ounce of sympathy when addressing the media or publicly talking about players. But is it the wrong players too? Those are 2 very loaded questions to ask at this point in the season.
So here's something you have to remember about John Tortorella. And specifically the hiring of John Tortorella.
Okay.
John Tortorella was hired by a delusional general manager who thought this team was good and had a shot at the playoffs, and all they needed was a little kick in the ass.
Okay.
Now,
I like where you're going with this because that's part of why I'm bringing these questions up.
Right. Now,
I wasn't even going to mention that part of it, but that's part of why I'm bringing it up.
Well, that has to be mentioned here because
I wasn't going to mention who hired.
Sure, but Danny Briere did not hire.
That was what I was going to
John Tortorella.
That's how I was going to phrase it. It wasn't about this
John
other
Tortorella,
guy did.
Right. John Tortorella was not hired as a rebuild coach, at least at the time. Again, obviously, I personally love what John Tortorella has done. I think he has forced a little bit of accountability into this room, whether you like it or not. I think he has. Do I think he has been a perfect head coach? No, I do not. And I will not say he has. I don't think he handled the Sean.
He never was going to. Never was going to be because he's never been anywhere else. And for that matter,
I don't think. I don't think he handled the Morgan Frost situation the right way. I don't necessarily think he handled the Sean Couturier situation the right way. Although I do think he was kind of just pushing Sean Couturier to see what he could get away with a little bit, just to see when his captain will push back at him. I personally really like the environment that it seems like John Tortorella has created, because if John Tortorella is telling the truth in the media, And obviously we don't know that because we're not behind those closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
But if he is telling the truth in the media, it sounds like behind closed doors, it is a welcome, opening environment where if you have grievances, issues, whatever
Right. If
you'd
you have
like
something
to
to say,
call
say
them,
it.
right, you can air them. You can air them publicly. You will not be shamed for airing them. Frank, honest discussions can be had and resolutions can be made as adults. And if John Tortorella is telling the truth in the media, which I'll say again for at least the third time here, then that is, in my opinion, a healthy environment for professional athletes to
Sure,
get
it
the
is.
best
It
out of
definitely
themselves.
is. The thing about it is, though, is that what and this is probably what goes to his wrong people portion of it
Yeah.
is it's the same situation for people who work in an office building, who have a boss that clearly tries to get the most out of you and kind of
Sure.
sits on their throne a little bit, like they have the big desk and the office and all that stuff like that. And there are some people who maybe aren't afraid about voicing their opinion and pushing back on that person because that's how they're wired. But there are also people who may sit there and go, listen, I need the job security. I need this job. I can't afford to lose my job. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to keep quiet and just put my head down and take whatever's handed to me because if I speak up, it could cost me something.
Sure.
I might not be here. And if I'm not here, then I'm back to school. Like it only hurts me. That person doesn't have any of the repercussions for it. You know, they have the ability to crush me into oblivion. So I'm going to keep my mouth shut. And if that's the kind of environment that you're also fostering, because there are people who are like, you can sit there and say it's open book, open door, all that stuff. It doesn't matter if you've got players who are quite literally sitting there afraid of the idea that if I say the wrong thing,
Well,
then I'm gone.
And the other thing John Tortorella has said, and again, if John Tortorella is telling the truth, is that they have not been in the room as much and they are letting it be kind of a player-driven locker room where these conversations are happening. And if you have something to bring to torch, you can bring it to them. But generally, kind of on the day-to-day basis, most conversations are being had, from player to player in that locker room. I think the thing that scares me, when you're asking about where this organization's going and if the right people are in the right spots and things like that, the part that scares me is there have been some rumors. Elliot Friedman talked about it a little bit. Some other names, it's been floated around that John Tortorella has aspirations to be in management. And there are rumors that he will be leaving his coaching job maybe as soon as this offseason to accept a managerial front office role and kind of step off the bench and into the front office. If that were to be the case, that part concerns me.
For what reason?
Because I really like John Tortorella as the guy who takes what he's given and molds his best
tries to make the
piece
most
with it.
out of it.
Right. I don't necessarily trust John Tortorella to be the one purchasing the clay. So if that makes sense.
I know exactly what you're saying. What you're basically saying is that John Tortorella, the coach who is there to push and get as much out of a player, is fine to you, but John Tortorella, who eventually would have to become in that situation the evaluator, may not be.
And it's been said since basically Chuck Fletcher left and this new management system has come into play that it was a unit. Originally it was 5, it is now 4. Tortorella, Jones, Briere, Hilferty. I like John Tortorella in that group. I like John Tortorella's insight being input into that group. But I also like John Tortorella having the least power in that group and the smallest voice.
Sure.
Or the smallest voice as far as actual decision making goes. He can speak as loud as he
wants.
wants.
All right, so here, let me try to jump in here a little bit because we do have a hard out for time too. So we don't want to. I do still have more I want to get to beyond this topic. But I hear where you're coming from, and like there's ways that it works both ways, kind of like if Tortorella were to move to management at some point. And by the way, I know what people are saying is rumored out there. I don't think he's moving to management after this season.
Okay.
And I'm going to get to something later that I actually have a different possibility I want to float because I do think that this could come up. I think I brought up last show about if you're surprised by anything, certain things that John Tortorella does, then you're not as big of a hockey watcher as you claim to be, because
True.
there's kind of a book on him with how things go in certain situations. The benchings are part of it.
Yep.
Like, if you're surprised he's benched guys, don't be. Because
Right.
he's done it before and he'll continue to do it if that's the way he thinks most effectively sends his message. If he scratched a guy for a game, don't be surprised if he does that. He's done it before, he'll do it again. The media presentation, don't be surprised by it. He's done it before, he'll do it again.
Consistent as it gets.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't be surprised by that stuff. Actually, I'm going to throw another layer into it, because most times people just want to take the media portion of it and go, well, he just comes out and he's mean and he's angry about stuff. And he doesn't want to give the media the time of day with some stuff. No, I'll go another direction. It's not that part that I think that I'm pulling from his book.
Okay.
The part I pull from his book is, once this team was in a playoff race, when things start to go wrong, that's like, you're right. The pounding on the desk a little bit more. It gets a little bit more fiery, because now you're there and all of a sudden you're possibly not going to be.
Right.
And when it starts to go off the rails, sometimes I think that it just resorts to collective frustration. And nobody wants a coach. Like here's a perfect example. When the Flyers had Dave Haxtell as the coach, nobody wants a coach that when it's going off the rails is just kind of standing there taking it. You want a little bit of passion. It's why people like Peter Laviolette. It's why people look at other coaches around the league and like Rod Brindamore, let's say. Brindamore doesn't stand there like, oh, woe is me, the game's not going the way we want to. No, he's fiery, but he also has a different way of approaching the other parts of it. Yeah. You know, he doesn't come in when things are going really bad and start pounding in the desk and be like, oh, you know, whatever. He's a motivator. And I'm not saying John Tortorella is not a motivator, but I think the presentation that the fans get is, you know, is either we did a lot of good things, but we got stuff to work on, or gets like desk pounding. Like, don't you dare try to tell me that the game went this way, because that's not the way I saw it. So you're wrong, I'm right. You know, that's the way it is.
I feel like people look at John Tortorella as like the angry father of this team, and he just comes in and rages, and there's no meaning to it, and he's just mad to be mad, and he's just blah, 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 blah. I don't think that's the case.
I don't think that's the case either.
I think John Tortorella is crazy like a fox. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. And like I mentioned earlier, I do think a little bit of the presentation, the desk slamming and the apologizing to the reporter and the this, that, the other. But I think a little bit of that is smoke screening for a team that is failing and trying to take a little bit of heat off his players.
But if that's the case, this is when it comes out, when the team does like what this is saying to me is that, yeah, no expectations to start the season. It was supposed to be you're rebuilding. And then they got into the race, and then they stayed there, and then they kept doing things that kept them there and made it look like they were legitimately going to make it. And when it starts to fall apart, and the expectation from John Tortorella now is we're going to play to a level, we have an identity, and the identity starts to slip a little bit, and the execution slips, and the losses start to pile up. And now for him, it wasn't about rebuilding anymore. It was, we're going to make the playoffs.
Right.
He didn't have to say it. His reactions tell you that. And even if he is being a shield for everybody else, by being a shield for everybody else, he's telling you it's falling apart, and I'm doing my best to hold up the dam until it explodes.
And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think
maybe it isn't, but this is the way that stuff finishes with him sometimes. That's what I'm getting at.
Well, and we're talking about it, right? Is it a reason or is it an excuse that the roster isn't good enough, right?
Well, it's a reason.
Okay, because not only did your starting goaltender leave, your general manager also plucked your best or second best defenseman off your roster. And yes, he should have, and I'm not criticizing the move, and this is not me criticizing Danny Briere, but factually speaking, you also lost Sean Walker, who had played some of your biggest minutes this year, had been one of your best defensemen this year.
So one of the things that was in my head immediately as this is going on too is imagine if they didn't. And I'm not talking and I'm not talking about for the sense, okay, so maybe I should.
Oh, you're talking about if they didn't and were still here?
Yes. That was what I meant. I needed to finish that sentence. Imagine if they didn't and still collapsed.
I agree, and I think
then you're really freaking like this is.
And I think a couple of those games were close enough where Sean Walker may have made enough of a difference that you would have maybe gotten some extra points.
Well, but
if you're not, but I agree with you.
This is where I was trying to get to because I know people are going to think that this season was a giant waste of time if they finish in this spot right now and just miss the playoffs.
If they end up with like the 13th pick, I get it. I get it.
Well, okay, so first of all, there's basic look and different after Saturday for sure. Big difference after Saturday for sure, but there's basically 3 scenarios still left. One is they find a way and they make it. It's not super likely, but that is a possibility because I'm gonna
start hammering the 2010 train if they start winning games.
Sure, here. You are. Well, yeah, because they backed in that year too.
Mm-hmm. Sure did.
But it's still a possibility. It may not be a great possibility, but it is still a possibility.
Brian Boucher brought up 20 on one of these brought up 2010 on one of these broadcasts over the last couple of days. It's coming.
You were waiting for it, and you were waiting for it all week. Possibility number 2 is the other extreme. We even said to possibly make
they could fully fall apart here.
Well, to possibly make the playoffs, that is still mathematically alive anyway. It doesn't feel good right now. They would probably have to win out.
Pretty close. There's 4 games left. I think they need at least 6.
They would need to. I'll tell you this much. Then here's how I'll put it. They would need to win out to control any of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
otherwise, you're doing the same thing you've done for the last 2 weeks, which is sit there and hope that other teams lose on top of you winning.
And thankfully, so far they have been right. The Penguins have crawled their way back in it, but they're still terrible. The Islanders, the Capital, nobody wants the spot. Washington or
I don't think the Penguins are as terrible as you're going to make it out to be because I know. Right now, I wouldn't want to touch them in the playoffs. The team that's gone 6-0-2 in their last 8 games and beating teams like Tampa and all that.
And by the way, has Sidney Crosby, and he's
and him playing well, and everybody else around him starting to play better because of it and things like that. Like,
they're a problem if they get it.
Yeah, they're a big problem.
They're a problem if they get in.
Look, the part that I can't get over with that one is that literally 2 weeks ago they were 12 points behind the Flyers, and now those 2 teams are tied in points. Figure it out. I don't need, we don't need to be math experts here to do this. Anyway,
all right.
No, anyway, we're almost finished.
Yeah,
we're almost finished. So there's people who are going to think that this season was a waste of time for that or whatever. Yeah. I don't think that's the case at all. If you believe and know what Tortorella focused on with building culture and what the players started to believe is true. Nothing is a waste of time to me. If you learned something that helps shape your offseason, then you accomplished something this season. Even if it's the struggle at the end and you miss the playoffs after being in it, you're going to learn something. Oh. So I believe that there are 3 big possibilities that exist over the offseason into the next if they don't make it.
Okay.
1, I think that the team not only played over their heads this year, but you will see next year a season that possibly is a lot like 2022-23 instead. That
pretty tough.
And I think that that's a legitimate fear for the vibes that we're building throughout the course of the year is that a lot was going right in the first half of the season. And now the fear is that it's not going to be this good next year. So regression. Number 2, I think it's very possible Danny Briere in the front office makes some sort of big move this offseason because of how close they were.
To try to not slide backwards.
Not even to try to not slide backwards, to try to give them something that they desperately need, which is more talent.
God, would that have to be a goalie at this point?
No.
You don't think
I think they believe that if they believe that Fedotov can come in and be a legitimate backup to Sam Ersson, because they seem to have a lot of faith in Ersson too, and it's pretty obvious what's happened to Ersson, or at least you hope it is. And to me, a lot of these things, like a lot of what you're asking, is questions that get answered early next season, and that's actually going to bring me to point number 3.
Okay.
Or the third possibility, which is, I think if next year's team doesn't start well, it may not be a long leash for John Tortorella.
Interesting.
I expect him back as the head coach next season. I just think that as soon as the season started to look like a playoff year this year, possibly, everything changed from his vantage point, like I said. And when things don't go well, he plays the same cards. And if he continues to play the same cards and it's not February and March and, okay, you're this close, yeah, play those cards, you've got to push. If it's October, November, and you're like, we got to play these cards to try to get it on the rail,
not fall into a hole.
To try to get it back on the rails that early, then you're losing. Then he's losing it, and you're losing everything. And I think at that point in time, you don't worry about whether or not he's in your front office. You worry about how do we save.
If he's in your organization,
right? Yeah. What I believe is happening right now, more than anything, though, and this is the way I think people are feeling, and you can tell me because you're usually the fan perspective guy. So tell me if this is what's coming up. I think the fan base's trust issues are surfacing again.
I think they have reason to be.
Okay, so here's my reasoning. Assuming that the Flyers don't recover from this, the collapse that has now knocked them officially from a playoff spot, and they don't reach the finish line. They don't or they didn't reach the finish line if they don't do that, right? They didn't make the playoffs despite being there for nearly the entire season. They didn't lose enough to take the easy way out and get a top 5 pick. They didn't trade assets away at the deadline completely. Like, yeah, they moved Walker, but you opted for the Sealer extension and you didn't trade Scott Lawton at this time or whatever. And I'm not saying that stuff couldn't happen or whatever. And you didn't get what you could from all these guys in 1-year deals. You re-signed Ryan Poehling.
Yep.
And you have long-term contracts in place with Owen Tippett and now Nick Sealer, and Joel Farabee still got some term, and Sean Couturier and Travis Sanheim. And like I said, Poehling resigns and Ersson resigned early, and you want to extend Ivan Fedotov. And so it's going to be a lot of the same players who aren't good enough to you coming back. And they're going to finish right in the mushy middle when you're not good enough to make the playoffs, but not bad enough to be in the lottery. So you end up picking, I actually, no joke, wrote down the exact spot you said, 13th or something of the sort.
So what you're telling me is we're back in that same rotation we were in the early 2010s.
No, here's my problem. No, just I'm not finished with that.
Okay.
That's what it's going to look like. And I can sense the trust issues building. Like, well, you were there all year. So yeah, of course you go for it. But when you don't make it, now you're going to be stuck in the middle. And it wasn't supposed to be this kind of year. And the biggest problem that I have with that kind of theory is for most of the season, I saw people praising John Tortorella for getting the most out of the players and making them competitive and fun. And now that you're not having fun anymore and they don't look as competitive, now it's he's lost the room. He's got to go. He's the problem. I'm not absolving him of blame. I'm just saying he's not alone. Like everybody, I think a lot of people are looking at, well, of course the roster wasn't talented enough. And of course it wasn't going to be
can I tell you where
material. So it's got to be him.
Can I tell you where the trust issues are coming from?
Well, I wasn't finished completely, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Let me see.
Well, you're talking about fans with trust issues, man. I'm telling you, It comes back to the goaltending. It all comes back to the goaltending because since the second Bernie Parent trade, the Flyers haven't had a goaltender. And yes, I know they had Ron Hextall, and he was very, very good for a long time, and I'm not taking anything away from him. And I know, but who is it? Who is it? Steve Mason never had a backup. And if he had a backup, he would have been probably the second or third best Flyers goalie of all time if he had a reasonable backup.
I didn't have that as the reason, by the way, like completely for the trust issues. I understand where you're coming from with it.
I think that's where it all comes from, because if the Flyers got if the Flyers got 890 goaltending,
it's better than what they're getting, and it probably wins a game.
Below league average, bad. That's not good goaltending. But it's so incredibly much better than the goaltending they've been getting.
You know what?
It would have won you at least 2 games.
You know what? I lied a little bit. I do have part of the reasoning behind that, like as goaltending, and I didn't mention any particular goalie in general because it's not them.
No, and it's not them. It's not Sam Erson's fault. It's not.
No, so
fault. It's not.
So let me go into the next point, because this is like, again, where I'm saying, like, this is where trust issues come in, and this is a problem I have with it, because all season long I've also heard nothing but praise for Danny Briere, how he's handled every situation well. He did the right thing moving Sean Walker. Look at how he was able to get Ivan Fedotov here, and how the Gauthier trade didn't get out until it was over, so he could get Jamie Drysdale instead of next to nothing. And now it's going to be, the team didn't finish low enough to get a good enough pick and didn't make the playoffs. And it's like that trust in your general manager, who could just as easily get a find in the first round, is gone.
Who could get 2 finds in the first round because, oh, by the way, you have Colorado.
I think it is the biggest load of crap that people look at general managers, because they're the Flyers general manager and because of the way things have gone, that you immediately default to, you can't pick 13th because then you just get Travis Sanheim over again.
Right. I think
I understand the trust issues with, yes, you've been failed by previous general managers. This guy is in his second year drafting at this point. If you trusted everything else to this point in the season, trust that he knows how to draft a freaking player.
Well, and something that we've talked about on this show before, some of these trust issues come from the fact that it's not okay. I'm going to look directly into the eyes of the fan base here. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, I'm looking directly into your eyes.
This is going to be the greatest place to come out right early of this, by the way. We're going to be finished right after this.
Bob Clark is not part of this front office anymore. Paul Holmgren is not part of this front office anymore. Bill Barber is not part of this front office anymore. Not in a meaningful way. I know they're technically still there. I know they technically still have titles, but they're not part of this front office in a meaningful way. Now, I'm not sitting here telling you that they are 100% going to pick the next Alex DeBrincat in the second round this year. I'm not telling you that. But what I am telling you is that from this perspective, it has to be a bit of a clean slate. You have to give them a chance. They have not drafted in this current Flyers front office has not drafted and developed anybody. Not really.
We got 1 year of it.
Well, right. They took over 10 weeks before the draft. And I know Danny Briere was before that, but like they took over 10 weeks before the draft. How about different? How about this is your first real draft where you had a whole year of scouting?
True. But how about this part for example? They took a player whose talent level was top 3 material in the draft at 7, knowing you weren't getting him for at least 1, 2, probably 2, and maybe even 3 years.
And there's still a hope he pulled a bit of a Jaromir Jagr and he comes over a little sooner.
Well,
come on.
We didn't even talk about this last week, but I think that like the way that the Fedotov thing went down creates at least a little bit of an interesting thread to it. I don't know that it means it's going to happen any sooner than it was ever going to. Sure. But I think that it means that there's a line of somehow or other, that means there's a line of communication that is open.
And if that were to happen, and again, neither of us necessarily expect it this offseason, but if that were to happen, that is a full-blown game changer. That changes your entire offseason.
For what it's worth, by the way, I have a simple theory to what you're saying about the first year thing and all stuff like that. Here's the simplest thing I can say about it. If you at any point during the course of this year, including right now, because it's still relevant right now, if you at any point during the course of this year have freaked out a little bit or been very intrigued by and excited about in any way, shape, or form Denver Barkey, then you have a reason to trust them because Denver Barkey looks like a 3rd-round find at this given moment. So if you're getting excited about that kid, not knowing anything about his professional career yet, right? Danny Briere drafted him in the 3rd round.
Exactly. There is reason to have trust. Now,
so let this play out a little bit. And I feel like that's what I'm saying. That's why I feel like that's what's happening. They didn't finish the job. Everybody immediately deflects to the coaches losing the room because it's easy. It's always the easiest thing to do. Yep. They're not going to get good draft position. The sky is falling. Here's the reality. And we already brought it up. They're last in the league in save percentage since mid-January. They're last in the league in power play. The penalty kill fell off. They have a terrible overtime record. They've had more than their fair share of games where the talent disparity is stark. As much as John Tortorella wants to say,
it's like the Jason Kelce Super Bowl speech, but in reverse.
It's exactly where I'm going though. Is as much as John Tortorella wants to say, despite all of that and all the talk that they were, and the talk that they weren't supposed to be there, that they're here. Yes, they are here, and they were in a playoff spot with 2 weeks to go until the end of the regular season, because that's what our last show was. Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever. And they are still mathematically alive, even with 4 games to go, but they are nowhere near where they need to be. And we're trying to scrape by in the final weeks of the season and nearly have. It's running out of fuel. It's running out of time, and everyone wants a reason. And the reason simply is that everything that was going right, other than the power play, has gone wrong in the last month and a half, slowly but surely. They were playing with house money for a team that they had on paper, and the clock is striking midnight. Yep. And it's everything. It's the coaching decisions. It's the goaltending. It's the penalty kill. It's all the guys who play defense. It's the forwards disappearing offensively. It's all of it. It's even a little bit. It's your general manager who made the right decision to trade away your most consistent defenseman. It's that too. He made a decision that was, what was the word I kept using? I had a word for it. Possible self-sabotage. I'm not saying that that's the only reason, obviously, but it's part of it.
It's a contributing factor for sure.
Right. Yep. So even he contributed to it. So collectively, this happened because everything that could go wrong did in these last stretches of games.
And that doesn't necessarily make it a failure.
Right. And everybody wants to default to that because there's 4 games left and now you're out.
Now, listen,
and you're not eliminated, but you're out.
As a fan, as orange tinted sunglasses guy, a couple things can be true. Okay. I will be disappointed if they don't make the postseason at this point.
Absolutely. And everybody should be.
Right. That being said, I also I still recognize that trading Sean Walker for a first round pick was the correct decision.
Sure.
I think that, I mean, obviously getting Carter Hart off your team was the correct decision. You can make all the right decisions and still lose. And that's the great thing about life. You can do everything right and still lose.
You're speaking more from Danny Briere's perspective, I hope, because I think there's people who would definitely argue all the right decisions from a coaching
John Tortorella definitely hasn't done everything right. No.
But
the players certainly haven't either.
But I think where you're coming from is that, and maybe it's a little bit more specific than even just Danny Briere, is that not only Danny Briere, but Keith Jones as well have kind of maintained this. It was never about the playoffs thing, and they might not make the playoffs. And you're kind of sitting there going, like, because that they maintained that for most of the year, as disappointing as it is to come this far and not make it, because they kept that in front of them to some degree. Now, listen, there's people who could counter with maybe Nick Seeler wasn't the right decision. If this is where it was going to go, why'd they even bother with that? Just trade him too. But
something I will say, 5 years ago, if the team had the season they currently had, the team would have started sending out stuff for playoff tickets in like January.
You're probably right about that.
Whereas this year it felt, and I don't know, I'm not local on the ground anymore, so you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but it didn't feel quite as much like they were on pushing playoff tickets, pushing this, that, the other, up until kind of more recently when they're like, oh, they might actually make it. And again, maybe I'm wrong on that, but it certainly feels as though even the marketing team kind of knew where we stood this season.
Nah, well, and I'm not saying, like, I'm not disagreeing with it. What I'm actually saying is that, like, this is also why you pushed me constantly to say it. And I kept not going there because to me, it was one of these things where it's like, I don't know, the closest I came to was they beat Boston. They needed to get finish with 10 points in that 10 gamer. And they did. And I started to feel like, okay, but I kind of kept the caveat of it being, if they do what it looks like they're capable of and what they should do, then this looks like it's going to finish that way because they just, I'm pretty sure I even came away from it being like, win 5 out of the 9 that were left. And I think you might make it. And I still think that probably is true because at that given point in time, when they got out of the gauntlet, they've gotten 1 point since then, right?
Yep.
After the Ranger game. So they were at 82 points. And I literally was pretty much sitting there going 92 is making the playoffs. And I don't think I'm wrong about that. I think 90 probably makes it. I don't know if they make it beyond 87.
Well, they're going to have their opportunity this week. We have 3 games looking ahead between now and our next show. That Islanders game, of course, looming early next week. It may or may not matter. In the meantime here, or I'm sorry, the Washington game.
Yes.
In the meantime here, you have Montreal, the Rangers, and New Jersey. And you said it, man. It's pretty simple. You might not have to win out, but you're going to have to get pretty close. You got 8 points remaining. You might have to get 7.
I know that I know the one that looms large in this picture is the one that is the team you haven't beat yet this year, which is the Rangers, and I get that.
Hopefully, they're locked up and taking it easy.
Well, but the bigger, or not the bigger issue, but it's like it doesn't even matter. Like you also lost to Montreal within the last week, and you've lost to New Jersey before. And to be honest, lump in the fact that by the way, you lost 5-1 to the Chicago Blackhawks and 6-2 to the Columbus Blue Jackets, so you can lose to anybody.
Yep. Oh, you very clearly you can lose to anybody.
Now you're going to have to figure out if you can beat everybody again because that's the only way. And look, we'll see because here's the other thing I want to bring up before we kind of get out of here with this because that's looking ahead for the Flyers and we don't need to analyze anything with those.
No.
It's a very simple,
win or be done.
Right. It's a very simple equation and to be honest, I don't even need to go to the Rangers or the Devils game at this point with this. It starts with the Montreal game. You don't win that one. It's going to be really hard to overcome that part of it.
You absolutely need 2 points in Montreal.
The first step of this is to see if anything else goes your way in the process. You are still technically tied with the Penguins. for that last playoff spot.
On points, yep.
On points. The Red Wings and Capitals both play on Sunday, and if they don't gain any points, they remain a point behind you somehow despite that. All this stuff.
Crazy.
To be honest, I have no choice to do this because this did actually happen. So the Devils won on Saturday, so they're now 5 points back of the Flyers. And I guess that's not out of the realm of possibilities if the Devils win a couple more games, including the one head-to-head against you.
Oh, no. Oh, this is a nightmare. Okay.
So, but nothing's my point is that before Tuesday, nothing's changing in your standings place. They're 5 points back. Even if they win, they're going to be 3 back.
Yep.
The Red Wings and Capitals could leapfrog the Flyers on Sunday if they gain even just 1 point, because games in hand will dictate that. Then the Penguins play again on Monday night against Toronto. And if the good fortune that the Flyers seem to get on Friday happens and they don't win that one and the points hold and everything is the way it is, then you go into Tuesday and the opportunity exists. You win a game. You win a game.
You put too many ifs in place.
Oh, there's definitely way too many ifs. I'm saying that that's the way that matters that way. And if it doesn't go that way, like I'm pretty sure 2 weeks ago, 2 shows ago, I said something along the lines of, you can't just sit here and rely on scoreboard watching
Here's the simple
means for making the playoffs. And now they have to.
Yep. Well, and here's the thing though. You not only have to watch the scoreboard, you have to win hockey games. You have to score
I get that.
goals.
Okay.
And I know you get that. I'm curious.
No. I know. Okay. And but the way I'm breaking it down is you're going to scoreboard watch now until you play again. And there is a way that nothing much changes. And now that game becomes, hey, listen, if you win that one, you may get it back on the rails a little bit where everything else stays in the same relative position. If the scoreboard watching doesn't go well, and then on top of it, you don't win against Montreal again, what it becomes closer to is that it's already over and the last 2 or 3 may be meaningless. Like that's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm getting at is that there's a way for all 4 of these games to matter. There's a way for that last game against Washington to be for all the marbles.
Yep. And there's also a way, if you lose in Montreal on Tuesday, it doesn't matter because the rest of them become
yes, you've got to take care of business for your next game, but the magnitude of taking care of it is that it could put you back. Like you could win that game, and if everything else goes the way I just said, like some of it has for them, you jump back into a playoff spot if you win that
Absolutely.
Game. Yep. Or you lose that game, everybody else keeps winning like they have been, and we are saying goodnight on the season.
Yep.
Before before we ever get to the Jersey game.
Yeah, this is without a doubt the biggest week of the Flyer season because it's just as simple as win or go home. It's you're in the playoffs and it's not a best of 7 series. It's sudden death.
And
every game.
I'm this is my final thought, and then we're going to leave on this note.
Yep.
I'm not going to say anything for the 4 games that are lined up on the schedule before the Flyers next play in terms of the scoreboard watching aspect, because I'm not speaking on those teams specifically with this part.
Sure.
But I'm going to tell you that you are going to know everything you need to know after those 4 play out.
Yep.
When this puck drops on the Flyers Montreal game, you'll know everything you need to know in the first 10 minutes.
Absolutely.
If the first 10 minutes are what you like, everything you hope for, they'll be involved. If it's not, it's over.
Well, and we will be back next week to talk about those first 10 minutes as well as the rest of the game. The other 2 games, we might be doing a full-blown funeral on the season by then. So in the meantime, check us out on social media at YWT Podcast. You can follow along with the misery at Kevin Durso on all the social medias. You can find us everywhere you find your podcasts, including sportstalkphilly.com. Here we are, man. It feels like we're coming out of a bit of a fugue state with this team, but we're back to reality. It's going to be tough.
Yep.
Flyers got to win some games, and we'll be back next week to talk about it. See ya.